If Jesus wasn't born on December 25th, then when does the Bible say he was born? It's actually provable and very simple.
All right, let's see it.
In order to identify the time when Jesus was born, we have to start with John the Baptist, because we know exactly how many months that Jesus was born after John. The Gospel of Luke shows that before John was born, his father, Zacharias, was performing his priestly duties in the temple when an angel appeared and told him that he and his wife, Elizabeth, would have a son named John. So when he finished his priestly duties, he went home, followed instructions, and Elizabeth became pregnant. She conceived shortly after Zacharias came home from the temple. So if we can determine when he served in the temple, we can know when she became pregnant, when John was born, and finally, when Jesus was born. The priests were broken into 24 groups or divisions, with each division serving in the temple for 1 week at a time, from Sabbath to Sabbath. They continued in their weekly rotation except during the 3 annual holy day seasons when all 24 divisions served together. Zacharias was of the division of Abijah, which was the 8th of the 24 divisions. In the year 5 BC, which many scholars agree was the year John was conceived, the first group of priests began their service on the Sabbath of what today we would call April 8th. Divisions 3 through 7 lasted from April 29th to June 3rd. Then June 3rd to the 10th was the 8th division, when Zacharias served in the temple. But the Feast of Pentecost was actually on Sunday the next week, when all the priests would be in town from June 10th to the 17th. So Zacharias would have been serving in the temple for 2 consecutive weeks.
So this is the first and the most catastrophic of the problems with this calculation. To begin, each priest had 2 rounds of service throughout the year. So are we talking about the first round or are we talking about the second? We have to make an assumption there, and this creator is not telling you they're making an assumption there. Additionally, if we look at all of the divisions of service, they don't line up perfectly with the annual calendar back then. And so we have to make an assumption about whether or not the rounds of service start over from the beginning every first of the year, or if they run continuously. And if they run continuously, because they don't line up perfectly with the annual calendar, each year the date is going to change a little bit. Now, we have another assumption to make. If it runs continuously, does it recalibrate every few years? A lot of scholars say that every 6 years it recalibrated. So you started back at the first of the year with the very beginning of the divisions. So you have to make assumptions just to determine which of these courses and when that course may have been. But we cannot even figure out when that course may have been if they ran continuously without knowing on what date they started. So if it runs continuously, whether it's recalibrating or not, we have to know what year was the very beginning of the priestly service. And we don't know that. It definitely didn't start under David, but even if it did, we wouldn't know how to place it. Now, a lot of scholars will go look at some post-biblical texts, Josephus and the Mishnah, which identify what priestly group was serving in the temple when the temple was destroyed. And so if we know the date that the temple was destroyed, we can calibrate our calculations to that date. Now, there are problems with this. One is that they don't all identify the same date that the temple was destroyed. 2, we have no data that indicate that this specific division that is outlined in Chronicles existed when the temple was destroyed. Most scholars would say that priestly services description dates to after the destruction of the temple, around the year 500 or so, because it happens to closely match the way that some Neo-Babylonian texts divide up their priestly service in the temple. And so it seems to have been created after the destruction of the temple and in association with the priestly service that was going on during the exile or in the post-exilic period. And so in short, we have no way of confidently calibrating the priestly divisions to any specific year at all. And so once we get to 5 BCE, we have no way of identifying when we think Zacharias may have been in the temple. The date given in this video is teetering precariously upon a whole stack of assumptions that this creator is just not telling you they're making.
It was during this time the angel told him that he and his wife would have a son and name him John. Luke 1 verses 23 and 24 say, "As soon as the days of his service were completed, he departed to his house, and his wife Elizabeth conceived."
Now again, this creator is omitting something and not telling you about it. There's a phrase at the beginning of Luke 1:24 that has been very carefully left out. And in Greek, it says, "Meta vetavtas tasimeras," or, "and after these days." And this phrase is not very specific regarding the length of time that has passed. Could be days, could be weeks, could plausibly be months. We just don't know. Now, this video is going to assume that conception took place within 2 weeks after Zacharias' returning home from the temple, which is certainly plausible. But we just don't know for sure, and this creator omitted that phrase in order to make it sound like we have a better idea than we actually do.
Assuming she became pregnant during the following 2 weeks, June 18th to July 1st, we can count the normal 40 weeks of pregnancy from that time and know that John would have been born between March 25th and April 7th in 4 BC the following year. Now that we know the approximate time John was born, we can know when Jesus was born. Because in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, Mary became pregnant with Jesus, meaning Jesus would have been born right at 6 months after John the Baptist. This would bring us to the fall of 4 BC. So using this evidence in the Bible, we can prove that Jesus would have likely been born somewhere between September 16th and September 29th in the fall of 4 BC.
So this doesn't prove anything at all. It is just a suggestion based on a number of assumptions, some of them more plausible than others, some of them absolutely without merit. And one of the largest assumptions of all is that this account of Jesus' birth is historically accurate. But as I've stated in other videos, many scholars believe that Luke 1 and 2 were added to the Gospel of Luke after the rest of the Gospel had already been composed. And we know that there are historical problems with Luke 1 and 2, and so the likelihood that this is actually describing the real historical circumstances surrounding Jesus' birth is pretty low.